The billionaire in room 1208 had not spoken in 8 months, but the night Claire Bennett touched his hand, the heart monitor suddenly changed. Rain pressed softly against the tall windows of St. Augustine Medical Center, turning the Chicago skyline into a blur of silver lights and shadows. The hospital halls were quieter after midnight, filled only with the distant squeak of rolling carts, the faint hum of fluorescent lights, and the steady rhythm of machines keeping people alive. Claire Bennett pulled her navy scrub jacket tighter around herself as she stepped out of the elevator onto the restricted 12th floor. She looked exhausted. 27 years old, surviving on double shifts and cafeteria coffee, Claire had the kind of tiredness that lived behind the eyes. A loose strand of light brown hair had slipped from her ponytail, and faint shadows rested beneath her pale blue eyes. She checked the folded note in her hand again. Room 1208. Special assignment. Overnight observation. Hazard pay approved. Claire exhaled slowly. She needed the money badly. Her rent was already 5 days late, and the warning email from her landlord still sat unread in her inbox because she couldn't bring herself to open it again. "You're late," the charge nurse muttered as Claire approached the station. "Saw the train delay. Doesn't matter. Just remember the rules." Claire frowned. "Rules?" The older nurse lowered her voice immediately. "No questions about the patient. No photos. No social media. No discussing this floor with anyone outside the hospital. And if security asks you something, answer directly." Claire glanced down the dim hallway. Who exactly is this guy? The nurse hesitated for half a second too long. Someone important. Before Claire could ask anything else, the woman handed her a patient file and walked away quickly, like she didn't want to stay near room 1208 longer than necessary. Claire looked down at the thick black folder in her hands. The patient names section had been partially covered by another document. Strange. Very strange. But she pushed the thought aside and walked toward the room. Before we continue, thank you so much for supporting this channel and spending time with us tonight. Your support truly means everything to us. If you enjoy emotional stories like this one, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel so we can continue bringing you more unforgettable experiences together in future videos. Claire stopped outside the double doors of room 1208. 2 private security guards stood nearby in dark suits, their expressions unreadable. Not hospital security. Private security. One of them opened the door without saying a word. The room beyond was unlike any patient suite Claire had ever seen. Soft amber lighting replaced the harsh fluorescent glare found in most ICU rooms. Darkwood furniture lined the walls. A leather couch sat near the windows overlooking the city. Expensive, fresh flowers rested on a marble table untouched. But none of that was what caught Claire's attention. It was the man lying motionless in the hospital bed. Even unconscious, he looked intimidating somehow. Broad shoulders beneath the thin white blanket. Sharp jawline darkened by faint stubble. Thick black hair, slightly messy against the pillow. There was a stillness about him that felt heavy, almost unnatural. Machines beeped steadily beside him, tracking every fragile rhythm of his body. Claire glanced at the chart hanging near the bed. Severe traumatic brain injury. Multiple surgeries completed. Unresponsive state. 8 months. Her chest tightened slightly. 8 months was a long time. Most people stopped visiting long before that. She stepped closer carefully, setting down her supplies beside the bed. "Hi," she whispered automatically, the way she always greeted patients whether they could hear her or not. "I'm Claire. Looks like we'll be spending the night together." Silence answered her. Only the rain tapped gently against the windows. Claire adjusted his foreline first, checking the dosage levels. Then she replaced the cooling cloth resting near his neck with a fresh warm towel. As her fingers brushed lightly against his skin, she noticed something unexpected. He felt warm, human, not like a body frozen in time. Her eyes drifted lower and stopped at a faint scar near his collarbone. Then, another detail caught her attention. A pale mark circled his left ring finger, like someone had recently removed a wedding band. Claire swallowed softly. "What happened to you?" she murmured under her breath. The heart monitor continued its slow, steady rhythm. Beep, beep. Beep. She moved quietly around the room, dimming one of the brighter lamps before pulling a chair closer beside the bed. Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the city. Claire rubbed her tired eyes and leaned back for just a moment. You know, she said softly into the silence, I almost didn't take this shift tonight. Her voice sounded strangely loud in the enormous room. But life doesn't really give people many choices sometimes. She gave a tired little laugh to herself. I guess you probably understand that. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then suddenly, beep, 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 beep. Claire froze. The heart monitor had changed. Not dangerously, but definitely faster. Her eyes snapped toward the patient. And for the briefest moment, she could have sworn his fingers moved beneath hers. Claire stared at the monitor, her pulse suddenly matching the faster rhythm flashing across the screen. Beep, 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 beep. The sound lasted only a few seconds before settling back into its steady pattern, but it was enough to send a chill through her entire body. She looked down at the unconscious man again, waiting for another movement, another twitch, anything. Nothing came. His face remained perfectly still beneath the dim amber light. Claire slowly released the breath she had been holding and glanced toward the glass doors, half expecting someone to rush in after hearing the monitor shift. But the hallway outside remained quiet. Rain slid softly down the windows, overlooking the city, and thunder rumbled farther away now, fading into the distance. Claire leaned closer to the bed, cautiously. Did you hear me? She whispered before laughing nervously at herself. Okay, that sounded crazy. She checked the vitals again, carefully. Everything looked stable. Heart rate slightly elevated for several moments, then normal again. She should probably report it. But something inside her hesitated. If she called the neurologist every time a machine changed rhythm for 3 seconds, nobody on this floor would ever sleep. Claire pulled the blanket slightly higher over his chest and sat back down in the chair beside him. The silence returned. Heavy, almost intimate. Most nights in the ICU were loud in different ways. Phones ringing, doctors calling orders, families crying quietly in waiting rooms. But room 1208 felt disconnected from the rest of the world, like time itself had slowed inside these walls. Claire rubbed her cold hands together and glanced again at the hidden patient chart. No family photos, no visitors listed except legal representatives, no personal notes. Whoever this man was, he seemed completely alone. Her eyes drifted toward the city outside. Tiny headlights moved through the rain far below like rivers of light. Chicago looks prettier from up here, she said softly. From the ground, it mostly smells like exhaust and bad coffee. She smiled faintly to herself. You're probably too rich to know what bad coffee tastes like, though. Silence. Claire looked back at him carefully. Even unconscious, there was something disciplined about him. The faint scar near his collarbone. The expensive watch resting in the drawer beside the bed. The way his hands looked strong, even without movement. Whoever he had been before the accident, he definitely had not lived an ordinary life. Claire reached for a warm cloth again and gently cleaned the side of his arm where medical tape had irritated the skin. My mother used to hate hospitals, she murmured quietly. She said they smelled like loneliness. Her hand slowed slightly. She spent 6 months in one before she died. The words escaped before she realized she was saying them out loud. Claire swallowed hard and looked away quickly, embarrassed even though nobody could hear her. Sorry, she whispered. I do not know why I'm telling you that. The heart monitor shifted again, just slightly. Her eyes snapped upward immediately. Another increase. Tiny, but real. Claire sat perfectly still now, staring between the monitor and the man lying unconscious in front of her. No way, she breathed. Slowly, carefully, she moved closer until she was standing directly beside the bed. Can you hear me? Nothing. The machine steadied again. Claire frowned, thinking hard. Then she remembered something one of her nursing professors once said during training. Hearing is often the last sense to disappear. Even unconscious patients may respond emotionally to familiar voices. Claire looked uncertain for a moment before dragging the chair even closer beside him. Okay, she said quietly. Let us test a theory. She folded her arms across the edge of the bed and exhaled softly. My name is Claire Bennett. I grew up in Milwaukee. I hate winter, but somehow I still moved to Chicago because apparently I enjoy suffering. A tiny smile touched her lips. I work too much. I eat vending machine dinners more often than real food. And I am currently pretending my landlord is not threatening to kick me out. Beep. The monitor jumped again. Claire froze completely. This time there was no denying it. Her heart began racing. You really can hear me. The room suddenly felt colder, stranger, more alive. Claire stared at the unconscious billionaire for several long seconds before shaking her head slowly. Well, that is unsettling. She looked around the luxurious room again, noticing details she had ignored earlier. The camera in the upper corner pointed directly toward the bed. A second monitor near the wall displayed encrypted medical data she could not access. Even the flowers looked expensive enough to cost more than her weekly paycheck. Whoever this patient was, powerful people clearly wanted him watched at all times. Claire stood and walked toward the sink to rinse the cloth in warm water. As she turned the faucet off, movement outside the glass wall caught her eye. One of the security guards stood silently in the hallway, watching the room through the window. Watching her, Claire felt her stomach tighten immediately. The guard did not look away when their eyes met. After several uncomfortable seconds, he finally stepped back into the shadows of the hallway again. Claire turned slowly toward the patient. What kind of life did you have? She whispered. Rain continued tapping softly against the windows, while the city glowed below them. And somewhere inside the silence of room 1208, the man who had not spoken in 8 months suddenly squeezed her fingers ever so slightly beneath the blanket. Claire stopped breathing for a moment when she felt the pressure against her fingers. It was weak, barely there, but it was real. Her eyes widened slowly as she stared down at the large hand resting beneath hers on the blanket. No, she whispered under her breath. Carefully, almost afraid to move, she tightened her fingers slightly around his. Can you do that again? The room stayed silent except for the steady hum of machines and the rain outside the windows. The city beyond the glass looked washed in silver and blue now, nearing 3 in the morning. Claire waited several seconds, her pulse thundering in her ears. But the movement did not come again. She swallowed hard and quickly reached for the bedside chart. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrote down the time and the changes she observed in his neurological response. Increased heart activity, possible voluntary finger movement, responsive to voice stimulation. Claire leaned back in the chair, staring at the unconscious man with entirely different eyes now. Before tonight, he had simply been another patient. A mysterious one, yes, but still a patient. Now, he felt like someone trapped behind a locked door, trying desperately to reach the outside world. She looked at him quietly for a long moment. You are still in there, she murmured. Aren't you? Outside the room, the security guard passed by the glass doors again. Claire noticed him immediately this time. The same dark suit, the same emotionless stare. Something about this entire floor unsettled her more with every passing hour. She stood slowly and walked toward the coffee machine near the wall. The tiny paper cup warmed her hands as she glanced around the luxury suite again. Fresh orchids, leather furniture, a private oxygen system. Someone was spending an unbelievable amount of money keeping this man alive, which meant somebody still needed him alive. Her eyes drifted toward the television mounted near the corner of the room. She picked up the remote, absent-mindedly, and lowered the volume before flipping through late-night news channels. Most showed weather reports, election coverage, or sports highlights. Then suddenly a familiar face appeared on the screen. Claire froze. Whitmore Biotech shares continue to struggle as acting Chief Financial Officer Nathan Whitmore reassures investors that the company remains stable despite ongoing uncertainty surrounding Chief Executive Officer Adrian Whitmore's condition. Claire stared at the television, her coffee forgotten completely. The photograph beside the reporter showed the same man lying unconscious behind her. Same dark hair, same sharp jawline, same scar near the collarbone barely visible beneath an expensive suit collar in the photo. Adrian Whitmore, Billionaire, founder of one of the fastest-growing biotech companies in America. 34 years old. Chicago business royalty. Claire slowly turned toward the bed again, disbelief written all over her face. Oh my God. The news continued softly in the background. Whitmore has remained in an unresponsive condition since the accident on Lakeshore Drive 8 months ago. Sources close to the company say leadership decisions may soon become permanent if there are no signs of recovery. The screen changed to footage of stock traders, reporters, and cameras surrounding the Whitmore headquarters downtown. Claire muted the television completely. Suddenly everything made sense. The security guards, the secrecy, the cameras, the restricted access floor. Her stomach tightened uneasily. This was not simply a patient anymore. This was a man worth billions of dollars lying defenseless in a hospital bed, while powerful people waited to see whether he would ever wake up. Claire looked down at Adrian again. Somehow the room felt colder now that she knew his name. Stranger too. She had spent hours talking casually to one of the most powerful men in the city without realizing it. Yet nothing about him looked powerful at this moment. Under the soft amber lighting, he simply looked tired, fragile, human. Claire stepped closer to the bed again and lowered herself carefully into the chair beside him. You know what is weird, she said quietly. I thought learning who you were would change something. She smiled faintly to herself, but honestly, it does not. Her fingers lightly adjusted the blanket near his shoulder. You are still just a patient to me. The monitor beeped steadily beside him. Claire shook her head softly. Actually, no, that is not true anymore. Her eyes lingered on his face. You are the first patient who ever squeezed my hand back. Thunder rolled faintly again somewhere over the city. Claire glanced at the clock near the wall. 3:15 in the morning. She should have finished chart updates already, but instead she found herself staying beside him, talking to him, watching for tiny signs nobody else seemed to notice. She reached toward the bedside drawer to organize his personal belongings for inventory purposes. Inside rested a silver watch, a folded wallet, and a simple black leather notebook. Claire hesitated before opening it carefully. Most pages were empty, except for several handwritten lines near the back. Her breath caught slightly as she read them. If something happens to me, do not let Nathan run the company alone. Claire stared at the sentence, confusion spreading across her face. Before she could think further, footsteps suddenly approached outside the room. Heavy, fast. The doors opened sharply, and a tall blond man in an expensive charcoal coat entered with 2 lawyers behind him. His cold gray eyes locked instantly onto Adrian lying in the bed. Then slowly, they shifted toward Claire. Claire quickly closed the black notebook and stepped away from the bedside drawer just as the tall blond man entered the room. Something about his presence immediately changed the atmosphere. The warmth of the dim lights suddenly felt colder. Even the quiet beeping of the monitors seemed sharper now. The man removed his leather gloves slowly, his expression perfectly controlled, but his pale gray eyes carried a heaviness Claire did not trust. Expensive charcoal coat, tailored suit, gold watch worth more than her yearly rent. He looked every inch like the kind of man who belonged in boardrooms and magazine covers. One of the lawyers beside him leaned closer and whispered something quietly, but the man ignored him completely. His attention stayed fixed on Adrian. How long has he been stable tonight? He asked finally. His voice was smooth. Calm. Too calm. Claire straightened slightly beside the bed. Vitals have been steady most of the shift. The man nodded once without looking at her. Any changes? Claire hesitated. The memory of Adrian squeezing her fingers flashed through her mind instantly. So did the line she just read inside the notebook. Do not let Nathan run the company alone. Her stomach tightened. Nothing significant, she answered carefully. For the first time, the man turned toward her fully. His gaze lingered on her hospital badge. Claire Bennett, you are new on this floor. Yes, I am Nathan Whitmore. Claire pretended mild surprise, even though she already knew exactly who he was. Adrian's cousin, acting chief financial officer, temporary face of Whitmore Biotech, while the real CEO lay unconscious in front of them. Nathan walked slowly toward the bed, adjusting the cuff of his suit with one hand. "My cousin hated hospitals," he said softly while staring down at Adrian. He used to say machines made people forget how fragile life actually is. Claire remained silent. Nathan reached down and lightly straightened the blanket near Adrian's shoulder, but the gesture felt strangely rehearsed, almost performative, like someone acting out concern instead of feeling it. "The doctors still believe he can recover?" he asked without turning around. "Some neurological responses are possible even after long periods," Claire replied professionally. Nathan smiled faintly at that. "Possible. That is an optimistic word." His eyes finally shifted back toward her again. "You seem compassionate, Miss Bennett. That can be dangerous in places like this." Claire frowned slightly. "I'm just doing my job." "Of course." Nathan's smile remained perfectly polite, but something underneath it unsettled her deeply. He glanced toward the heart monitor briefly before checking the expensive silver watch on his wrist. "I have an early board meeting downtown. Please notify the neurologist immediately if there are any major developments." Major developments. The phrase echoed strangely in her head. Not if Adrian wakes up. Not if he improves. Just developments. Nathan turned toward the door with the lawyers following behind him. But before leaving, he paused near Claire once more. "One more thing." Claire looked up carefully. "Room 1208 requires discretion. The media has offered absurd amounts of money for information about my cousin's condition." His eyes hardened slightly. "I trust that will not become a problem." Claire forced a calm nod. "No, sir." Nathan studied her face for another second too long before finally walking out. The heavy doors closed behind him softly. Silence returned immediately, but this time it no longer felt peaceful. Claire slowly released the breath she had been holding. Her heart was beating faster now. She looked back toward Adrian lying motionless beneath the dim lights. "Your cousin gives terrifying serial killer energy," she muttered quietly. The monitor beeped steadily beside him. Claire walked back toward the bedside drawer and stared at the black notebook again. She knew she should not invade patient privacy further. Hospital policy alone could get her suspended for reading personal materials. But something felt wrong now. Deeply wrong. Slowly, she opened the notebook again. Most pages remained empty except for scattered handwritten thoughts and unfinished notes. Several names. Financial figures. Fragments of reminders. Then one sentence near the bottom of a page made Claire's chest tighten instantly. "If anything happens to me, investigate the brake failure." Claire stared at the words. Brake failure. Not accident. Failure. Her eyes widened slowly. She looked up toward Adrian instinctively, as though expecting him to suddenly wake and explain everything himself. "What happened to you?" she whispered again. Outside the windows, the rain had finally stopped. The city lights reflected against the glass like scattered stars while dawn slowly threatened the horizon far beyond downtown Chicago. Claire looked back at the unconscious billionaire, then at the notebook in her hands, then finally toward the hallway where Nathan had disappeared moments earlier. The uneasy feeling in her chest deepened. She carefully returned the notebook to the drawer exactly where she found it and sat back down beside the bed. "Okay," she whispered softly. "Now I really think you're trying to tell me something." She gently adjusted the blanket again before reaching for his hand almost without thinking. Warm, still alive, still fighting somewhere beneath the silence. Claire leaned back in the chair, exhaustion finally beginning to settle into her bones as dawn approached outside. Her eyes slowly drifted shut for only a moment beside the bed. But just before sleep reached her completely, Adrian Whitmore's heart monitor suddenly accelerated wildly, and his fingers tightened firmly around her hand. Claire's eyes flew open the instant the monitor began screaming through the quiet room. Adrian's fingers tightened around hers with shocking strength. No longer a faint twitch, but a real grasp that sent adrenaline racing through her body. "Adrian," she breathed. His chest rose sharply beneath the blanket. Another violent spike flashed across the monitor. Beep, beep, beep. Claire shot out of the chair and hit the emergency call button beside the bed. "I need assistance in room 1208 now," she shouted toward the hallway. Adrian's head moved suddenly against the pillow, his breathing uneven and shallow, as if his body was fighting its way back toward consciousness after being buried underwater for months. Claire rushed back to his side immediately. Hey, it is okay, she whispered quickly, gripping his hand carefully. You are safe. You are in the hospital. His eyelids twitched violently. The machines around the bed began reacting all at once now. Oxygen levels fluctuating. Heart rate climbing. Claire's pulse hammered in her ears while footsteps thundered outside the doors. A team of nurses and doctors rushed into the room, seconds later led by Dr. Reynolds, the overnight neurologist. What happened? He demanded sharply. Neurological response escalated suddenly. Claire answered breathlessly. He squeezed my hand, then vitals spiked. Dr. Reynolds moved beside the bed immediately while another nurse adjusted medication levels. Adrian, can you hear me? The doctor called firmly. For one terrifying second, nothing happened. Then slowly, Adrian Whitmore's eyes opened. The room froze completely. Claire felt the air leave her lungs. His eyes were dark blue, unfocused at first beneath the harsh medical lights. Confused, frightened, alive. One of the nurses gasped softly beside her. Dr. Reynolds leaned closer instantly. Adrian, stay calm. You are at St. Augustine Medical Center. You were in an accident. Adrian's breathing became rougher as his gaze moved frantically around the room. The monitors screamed louder. Panic flooded his expression. His body jerked weakly against the bed as if trying to escape something invisible only he could see. Easy, Claire whispered quickly, stepping closer again. You're okay. Adrian's eyes suddenly locked on her voice. Instantly, the panic eased just slightly. The tension in his jaw softened. His breathing slowed enough for the monitors to stabilize a little. Dr. Reynolds noticed it too. Everyone in the room did. Adrian could barely focus on anything else around him except Claire. She moved beside the bed carefully, speaking softly while the medical staff continued checking his neurological responses. You are safe, she repeated gently. Nothing bad is happening right now. Adrian stared at her like he was trying desperately to remember something important. His lips parted slightly, dry from months of silence. Claire leaned closer instinctively to hear him. The room became completely still. Then finally, in a voice cracked and fragile from disuse, Adrian whispered one word. Claire! Her heart stopped. The nurses exchanged stunned looks immediately. Dr. Reynolds frowned in disbelief. How does he know your name? Claire could barely answer. I do not know. But deep down she did know. Somewhere inside the darkness of his coma, he had heard her. Every late-night conversation. Every tired confession, every quiet story beside his bed while the city slept outside those windows. Adrian's eyes drifted shut again briefly as exhaustion overwhelmed him, but his fingers never released her hand. Adrian, Dr. Reynolds continued carefully. Do you know where you are? His brow tightened faintly. Confusion clouded his face again. Hospital, he whispered weakly. Good, the doctor said quickly. Do you remember your full name? Silence stretched for several long seconds. Then slowly, painfully, Adrian answered. Adrian Whitmore. Relief flooded the room immediately. One of the nurses stepped outside to alert administration while another hurried to call additional specialists. The impossible had finally happened. Chicago's missing billionaire was awake. But Adrian looked anything except powerful. Beneath the dim lighting, he looked exhausted. Vulnerable, lost. His gaze kept drifting back toward Claire over and over as though she was the only stable thing in the room. Dr. Reynolds checked his pupil response carefully before lowering his voice. Memory may return gradually. We need to avoid overwhelming him. Claire nodded quietly, though her own thoughts were spinning wildly now. Adrian woke up, saying her name. Not the doctor's, not his lawyer's, not his cousin's, hers. Outside the room, activity exploded across the 12th floor. More security arrived. Hospital administrators rushed through the hallways, whispering urgently into phones. Somewhere downtown, boardrooms and investors would soon learn the billionaire so everyone believed might never recover had suddenly opened his eyes. But inside room 1208, none of that seemed to matter. Adrian looked only at Claire, like he was anchoring himself to her voice while the rest of the world crashed back around him. Dr. Reynolds finally stepped away from the bed and lowered his tone toward Claire. He should not be overstimulated tonight. One nurse stays with him. The doctor glanced meaningfully between them. That nurse should probably be you. Claire looked back at Adrian slowly. His eyes were half closed again now, exhaustion dragging him downward, but his hand still held onto hers tightly enough that she could feel the faint tremor running through his fingers. Then, just before sleep pulled him under once more, Adrian whispered something so quietly only Claire could hear it. Do not let Nathan know yet. The sun rose slowly over downtown Chicago, spilling pale gold light across the windows of room 1208 for the first time in months, while Adrian Whitmore slept peacefully beside the steady rhythm of the monitors. The entire hospital had transformed overnight. Security doubled on every floor. Administrators whispered nervously through hallways. Reporters crowded outside the main entrance after rumors spread that the billionaire CEO had finally regained consciousness. But inside the room, everything remained strangely quiet. Claire sat curled in the leather chair beside Adrian's bed, with a paper cup of coffee warming her hands. She had not gone home. She had not even changed out of her navy scrubs. Every time she tried stepping toward the door, Adrian's breathing changed slightly, as though even asleep he sensed her leaving. Dr. Reynolds noticed it too. His neurological activity stabilizes around familiar stimuli. The doctor explained softly earlier that morning. Right now, you are that stimulus. Claire still could not fully process it. She looked toward Adrian again. Awake, he looked younger somehow, less untouchable than the business magazines always portrayed him. Without the sharp confidence of television interviews and tailored suits, he was simply a man recovering from months trapped inside silence. Around 10 in the morning, Adrian stirred again. His brow tightened faintly before his eyes opened slowly beneath the soft sunlight. Confusion flickered across his face for one brief second until he saw Claire sitting nearby. Immediately, some of the tension eased from his expression. Hey, she said quietly, setting her coffee aside. Welcome back. Adrian stared at her for several seconds like he was grounding himself in reality. His voice remained rough when he finally spoke. You stayed. Claire gave a small, tired smile. Someone had to make sure you did not scare the entire neurology department again. The corner of Adrian's mouth moved very slightly. Not quite a smile, but close. Claire helped him sit up carefully while the morning nurse checked his vitals. Every movement exhausted him quickly. 8 months in a hospital bed had weakened his muscles dramatically, and even lifting his arm looked difficult now. Still, he never complained once. He only kept watching Claire quietly whenever she moved around the room. How much do you remember? She asked softly later while adjusting his blankets. Adrian's eyes drifted toward the windows. Pieces. His voice lowered. Zen. Headlights. Losing control of the car. His jaw tightened faintly. Then your voice. Claire looked at him carefully. Mine. Adrian nodded weakly. You talked constantly. Embarrassment flashed across her face immediately. Oh God. For the first time, an actual smile appeared briefly on his lips. Small, tired, but real. It helped. Something warm settled unexpectedly in Claire's chest. She looked away quickly, pretending to focus on organizing medications beside the bed. Most people would probably call me annoying after hearing me for 8 months. Adrian watched her quietly. Most people leave. The room fell silent after that. Not awkward silence. Gentle silence. The kind built slowly between two exhausted people who somehow understood loneliness better than they wanted to admit. Later that evening, physical therapy specialists arrived to evaluate Adrian's mobility. The first attempt to stand nearly ended in disaster. Adrian's legs shook violently beneath him after only several seconds upright. Sweat dampened his forehead instantly as frustration darkened his expression. Easy, Claire whispered beside him, supporting one side carefully while the therapist steadied the other. Your body forgot how to do this. That does not mean it cannot relearn. Adrian clenched his jaw, breathing hard. I built $1 billion company before 30. His voice carried bitterness now. Now I cannot stand for 30 seconds. Claire looked directly at him. You survived something most people would not. Adrian's eyes lifted toward her slowly. That is not the same thing. Claire hesitated before answering quietly. No, it is harder. For several seconds, he simply stared at her. Something vulnerable flickered across his face, then disappeared just as quickly. They finally managed 3 slow steps before exhaustion forced Adrian back into bed. The therapist left soon afterward, promising improvement would come gradually. But, long after everyone else disappeared, Adrian remained awake staring out at the city skyline. Night settled softly over Chicago again, while rain began tapping gently against the windows once more. Claire dimmed the lights before checking his phone. You should try sleeping, she said quietly. Adrian shook his head immediately. Every time I closed my eyes, his voice stopped there. Claire studied him carefully. Nightmares. Adrian's silence answered for him. She pulled the chair closer beside the bed again, almost automatically. Then stay awake for a while. Adrian looked toward her. You're off shift. Claire shrugged lightly. And you are apparently terrified of sleeping. Another faint smile touched his lips before fading again. Claire reached toward the small speaker near the windows and quietly turned on soft piano music she sometimes played during overnight shifts. The gentle melody filled the room while rain streaked the glass outside. Adrian's eyes slowly closed as he listened. Not asleep yet, just resting, trusting. And for the first time since waking up, the billionaire who terrified boardrooms across America finally looked peaceful beside the nurse who never stopped talking to him in the dark. 3 days after Adrian woke up, the 12th floor no longer felt like a hospital. It felt like a fortress. Security guards stood outside every elevator 24 hours a day. Lawyers moved through the hallways whispering into phones. Executives arrived, carrying tablets and financial reports while reporters camped outside the building hoping for a single photograph of the billionaire CEO who had suddenly returned from the edge of silence. But inside room 1208, the world remained smaller, quieter. Adrian sat near the windows in a wheelchair while rain rolled softly across the Chicago skyline again. He looked exhausted after physical therapy, his dark t-shirt hanging looser against his frame now that months in bed had stripped away much of his strength. Claire adjusted the blanket across his legs carefully before handing him a paper cup of coffee from the hospital cafe. It is terrible coffee, she warned. Adrian took a slow sip anyway. You were right, he said, dryly. This tastes like sadness. Claire laughed quietly before sitting beside him near the windows. The sound surprised both of them slightly. It had become easier somehow these past few days. The conversations, the silence between them. Even Adrian's guarded personality had begun softening around her in ways nobody else seemed to notice. Around executives and doctors, he remained cold, distant, controlled. But with Claire, he let exhaustion show. Fear, too. Sometimes late at night, she caught him staring blankly into the darkness after another nightmare dragged him awake. He never described the dreams completely, only fragments. Zang, screeching tires, headlights, then nothing. You should be resting, Claire said softly after noticing how pale he looked. Adrian's eyes remained fixed on the storm outside. Every time I rest, Nathan schedules another board meeting. Claire hesitated. You still think he had something to do with the accident? Adrian's jaw tightened immediately. I know he did. His voice lowered. I just cannot prove it yet. Silence settled between them again, while thunder rolled faintly over the city. Claire thought about the notebook hidden in the bedside drawer. The brake failure note. The warning about Nathan running the company alone. She had not told anyone about it. Not even Adrian yet. Somehow she was waiting, watching, trying to understand which people around him could actually be trusted. A soft knock interrupted the quiet moment. Claire turned toward the door just as Dr. Reynolds stepped inside, holding a tablet. You have a visitor, the doctor said carefully. Adrian's expression darkened immediately. Nathan. Dr. Reynolds nodded once. He insists on seeing you. Adrian looked away toward the windows again, tension immediately returning to his shoulders. Claire noticed his right hand tighten slightly against the armrest of the wheelchair. Fear. Real fear. You do not have to do this right now, she said quietly. Adrian remained silent several seconds before finally answering. No, I need to see him. Nathan Whitmore entered moments later wearing another perfectly tailored suit, his blonde hair neat despite the storm outside. But this time Claire noticed something different immediately. Surprise. Genuine surprise flashing briefly across Nathan's face when he saw Adrian awake near the windows instead of unconscious in bed. It vanished almost instantly beneath his polished smile. Adrian, Nathan said smoothly. It is good to finally see you awake. Adrian's expression remained unreadable. Funny, you did not seem in much of a hurry to tell the board. The room chilled instantly. Nathan adjusted his cuff calmly. Your condition was unstable. I wanted to protect the company from unnecessary panic. Adrian gave a faint, humorless smile. Of course you did. Claire stood near the counter, quietly pretending to organize medications while tension thickened between the two men. Nathan's eyes eventually drifted toward her. Miss Bennett seems to have become very important around here. Adrian answered before Claire could speak. She stays. The words came sharp. Protective. Nathan noticed it immediately. So did Claire. An unreadable expression flickered across Nathan's face before he smiled again. Well, it seems your recovery is progressing faster than expected. Adrian's eyes hardened slightly. Disappointed? Silence. Just 1 second of silence. But Claire saw it. Nathan's mask slipping for the briefest moment before he recovered smoothly. You should focus on healing, Nathan replied calmly. The company can wait. Adrian stared at him coldly. That is the difference between us. I built Whitmore Biotech. You inherited a desk. Nathan's jaw tightened faintly. Be careful, Adrian. Stress is dangerous in your condition. Then he turned toward the door again. But before leaving, his eyes landed briefly on Claire one last time. Not angry, not threatening. Worse, calculating, as though evaluating whether she had become a problem. The moment Nathan disappeared into the hallway, Adrian exhaled sharply and leaned back against the wheelchair. His hands trembled slightly now. Claire moved beside him immediately. Hey, she whispered softly. Breathe. Adrian shut his eyes briefly. He knows something changed. Claire looked toward the closed door uneasily. Then maybe we should stop pretending everything is normal. Adrian opened his eyes slowly and looked at her. Claire, there is something in my penthouse office, locked inside the bottom drawer of my desk. His voice lowered carefully. If Nathan realizes my memory is returning before I get it, we are both in trouble. A cold chill ran through Claire instantly. Outside the windows, lightning flashed across the Chicago skyline while the storm deepened over the city. The storm over Chicago had not stopped for 2 straight days when Claire finally stood outside Whitmore Tower with Adrian's security key card trembling slightly in her hand. The glass skyscraper disappeared into low clouds above downtown, glowing silver against the rain like something cold and untouchable. Claire pulled her coat tighter around herself and looked back once toward the busy street. Adrian had insisted she go alone. Nathan watches everyone around me, he told her quietly the night before. But he still sees you as a nurse. That is our advantage. Claire hated how dangerous that sounded. She stepped inside the lobby, instantly surrounded by polished marble floors, soft piano music, and employees moving quickly through the towering building. Giant digital screens displayed the Whitmore Biotech logo across the walls. Before the accident, Adrian had built all of this. Yet somehow she could still picture him weak and exhausted in the hospital bed, asking her not to leave when nightmares woke him at 3 a.m. Can I help you? The receptionist asked politely. Claire forced a calm smile. Mr. Whitmore requested personal files from his office. The woman checked the key card and nodded immediately. Of course. Executive floor access has been restored. Minutes later, Claire stepped into Adrian's private office for the first time. The room overlooked the entire city skyline through massive floor-to-ceiling windows streaked with rain. Everything inside felt sharp and controlled. Dark wood shelves, clean glass surfaces, awards lining the walls beside, framed magazine covers with Adrian's face staring back confidently beneath headlines about billion-dollar innovations and America's youngest biotech visionary. Claire looked around slowly. Strange. This office belonged to the same man who now slept only when she sat beside him, playing quiet piano music in the dark. She moved carefully toward the massive desk near the windows and knelt beside the bottom drawer Adrian mentioned. The security lock blinked blue after scanning the keycard. Inside rested only one object, a silver flash drive. Claire stared at it uneasily before slipping it into her coat pocket, just as footsteps suddenly echoed outside the office. Her pulse jumped instantly. She straightened quickly, pretending to examine framed photographs on the wall while the office door opened behind her. Nathan Whitmore stepped inside. Claire's stomach dropped. His eyes narrowed slightly with surprise before the familiar polished smile returned again. "Miss Bennett," he said smoothly. "I did not realize the hospital now offered house calls." Claire forced herself to stay calm. "Adrian asked me to retrieve personal items." Nathan walked farther into the office slowly, removing his gloves while studying her face carefully. "Interesting." He stopped near the desk. "Because Adrian informed the board this morning that his memory remains unstable." Claire felt the flash drive heavy inside her pocket. Nathan's expression remained pleasant, but his eyes looked colder now. "You spent a lot of time with him," he continued quietly. "Enough to influence him. I am his nurse. Nonatan Smail Fantli. You stopped being only his nurse the moment he started trusting you more than his own family." Silence stretched between them while rain hammered softly against the windows behind Skyline. Claire finally met his gaze directly. Maybe trust has to be earned. Something dangerous flickered briefly behind Nathan's eyes, then disappeared. "Careful, Miss Bennett," he said softly. "Powerful men destroy people around them every day. Adrian is no different." Claire thought about the man struggling through physical therapy. The man terrified to sleep because of nightmares he could barely explain. The man who remembered her voice while forgetting almost everything else. "You are wrong," she answered quietly. Nathan stepped closer now, lowering his voice. "Then let me give you advice. Whatever Adrian told you about the accident, forget it." Claire's pulse quickened instantly. Nathan noticed. His smile widened slightly. "There are realities in this city you do not understand." He glanced toward the rain-covered windows overlooking Chicago. "People survive by learning when not to ask questions." Claire held his gaze several seconds before answering softly. "Maybe that is why good people stop surviving here." Nathan stared at her quietly after that. For the first time, his mask cracked completely. Not anger, not frustration, fear, just for 1 second. Then his phone buzzed sharply in his pocket, breaking the tension. Nathan checked the screen quickly, annoyance flashing across his face before he looked back toward Claire again. "You should return to the hospital," he said calmly. "Adrian needs rest." Claire nodded once and walked toward the door carefully, forcing herself not to move too fast. But the moment she stepped into the elevator alone, her hands began shaking violently. She reached in her coat pocket and pulled out the silver flash drive. Rain streaked down the glass walls around her while the elevator descended slowly toward the lobby. Her reflection stared back pale and frightened beneath the dim lighting. Whatever Adrian hid inside this drive, Nathan was terrified of it. An hour later, Claire returned to room 1208, soaked from the rain outside. Adrian immediately looked up from the hospital bed the second she entered. Relief softened his face instantly. "You got it?" he asked quietly. Claire locked the room door behind her before crossing slowly toward him. Then she placed the silver flash drive into his hand. Adrian stared down at it for several seconds, his expression darkening with something between anger and dread. "If this contains what I think it does," he whispered slowly, "Nathan's entire life is about to collapse." 2 nights later, Whitmore Biotech headquarters glowed against the Chicago skyline like a fortress preparing for war. Every financial news channel in America carried the same headline across giant screens inside the building. Emergency board meeting called after surprise reports of Adrian Whitmore's recovery. Luxury cars lined the entrance while reporters crowded behind barricades outside in the freezing evening rain. But high above the city, inside the executive conference room, the atmosphere felt colder than the storm outside. Nathan Whitmore stood at the head of the massive glass table, adjusting his cufflinks calmly, while investors and board members whispered nervously around him. "Until Adrian is medically cleared," Nathan said smoothly, "the company requires stable leadership." His voice carried the confidence of a man already preparing to win. Several executives nodded uncertainly, while cameras from financial media networks streamed the emergency meeting live across the country. Then suddenly the conference room doors opened. Silence crashed across the room instantly. Adrian Whitmore walked inside, slowly beside Claire. Gasps spread immediately around the table. Even after weeks of recovery, Adrian still moved carefully, his strength not fully returned yet. But the weakness only made the moment more powerful somehow, because he was standing, alive, present. Nathan's face, drained of color before the cameras, caught him forcing a stunned smile. "Adrian," he said carefully, "this is unexpected." Adrian's dark eyes never left him. "That seems to be happening a lot lately." Claire stayed beside him quietly near the doorway, while reporters outside the glass walls nearly exploded with activity. Flashing cameras reflected across the polished conference table. Board members exchanged shocked whispers. Adrian walked slowly toward his seat at the head of the table and rested one hand against the chair for balance. "Continue the meeting," he said calmly. Nathan recovered quickly enough to straighten his posture again. Of course, but for the first time since Claire met him, uncertainty had entered his voice. Adrian looked around the room carefully. 8 months ago, I nearly died in what everyone called an accident." Silence settled heavily across the conference room now. "During my recovery," Adrian continued, "I regained access to information hidden before the crash." Nathan's jaw tightened almost invisibly. Claire reached in her coat pocket slowly and removed the silver flash drive. Every eye in the room shifted toward it instantly. Adrian held out his hand, and Claire placed the drive into his palm. Their fingers brushed briefly. Warm, familiar, steadying. Adrian inserted the drive into the conference system beside the table. Seconds later, financial records appeared across the giant presentation screens. Wire transfers, offshore accounts, vehicle maintenance reports, hidden insurance policies connected directly to Nathan Whitmore. Shock rippled visibly across the room. One board member stood immediately. "What is this?" Adrian's voice remained cold and controlled. "Proof that my brake system was intentionally compromised 3 days before the crash." Nathan laughed once sharply, but the sound carried no confidence now. "This is absurd." Adrian clicked another file open. Audio recordings filled the room next. Nathan's voice discussing company succession plans weeks before the accident ever happened. Several executives looked horrified. Claire watched Nathan carefully now. The calm mask she feared for weeks had finally shattered completely. "You have no idea what you are talking about," Nathan snapped suddenly. Adrian stared at him without emotion. "No, I finally remember exactly what happened." Security doors opened behind the conference room moments later as 2 federal investigators entered quietly beside hospital legal representatives. Nathan turned toward them, stunned disbelief spreading across his face. One investigator stepped forward calmly. "Nathan Whitmore, we need you to come with us regarding financial conspiracy and evidence connected to the attempted sabotage investigation." The room erupted instantly into chaos. Reporters pressed harder against the glass outside, while board members shouted over each other in panic. But Adrian never looked away from Nathan. "You were family," he said quietly. Nathan's expression twisted bitterly. "Family does not survive in billion-dollar companies." Adrian answered softly, "That is why you lost." The investigators escorted Nathan from the room, while cameras exploded outside the conference hall. Yet through all the noise and flashing lights, Adrian suddenly looked exhausted again. The adrenaline holding him upright seemed to disappear all at once. Claire moved beside him immediately. "Hey," she whispered softly. "Sit down." Adrian obeyed without argument this time. His breathing had become uneven again beneath the stress and exhaustion. The boardroom around them continued spiraling into confusion, but Adrian looked only at Claire now. "Just Claire. You okay?" she asked quietly. Adrian stared at her several seconds before giving the smallest nod. "I could not have done this alone." Something inside Claire's chest tightened unexpectedly at the honesty in his voice. Not billionaire charm, not polished